Empowered Kids TV, where we introduce you to the people and ideas to help you take action to create the family of your dreams. Today's guest followed the drive of her own personal pain into the postdoctoral research program to find her freedom. An associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin, she has been credited with conducting the first academic studies into self-compassion. A pioneer, author, and speaker, our guest work has been featured extensively across the globe, including the New York Times, mindful.org, Impact Theory, just to name a few. What I love about our guest is her determination to help us push past the critical voice in our heads that most of us never even acknowledge, but live with each day. Her work has the power to liberate you from the hold of judgment, freeing you to find new levels of self-soothing and compassion, and along the way create an open-heartedness that can foster unconditional love for yourself and for others. So please, help me to welcome a woman who used self-compassion to find the path to true unconditional love for her autistic son, and is determined to empower us with greater resilience, confidence, and compassion by teaching us all how to be more loving to ourselves. The incredible Kristin Neff. Kristin, welcome to Empowered Kids TV.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. It's great to finally connect with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to start just at the base level in terms of really getting a solid understanding of what is self-compassion.
Right. So self-compassion, we're more familiar with compassion for others. We know how that feels. So it's when you feel with someone else in their suffering. The word compassion in the Latin, actually, passion means to suffer, come means with. So there's like an inherent connectedness in compassion. And so self-compassion is just having that same stance toward us. So we become aware that we're struggling as opposed to just like soldiering on. We feel connected in our struggles. This is very important because oftentimes when we make a mistake or something difficult happens, we feel like everyone else in the world is living a perfect life and it's just me who's failed or just me who's having this issue. So again, we're connected in it. We remember that this is part of life, this is part of being human. And then we give ourselves the same type of kindness and support that we would more naturally show to a good friend or someone we cared about. So it's really not rocket science. The only thing is that most people forget to be compassionate to themselves. They know they're supposed to be compassionate to others. And somehow we've gotten it into our heads as a culture that, self-criticism is good, even though the research shows it doesn't help you at all. So it's really just being a good supportive friend to yourself.
Let's talk about some myths, because there are a few myths around self-compassion where people could feel that makes me kind of soft.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the top myths and see if we can debunk a few of them.
Yeah. So, and luckily now there's tons of research debunking all these myths. So a big one is that it makes you soft, it makes you weak. It's actually just the opposite, right? So when things get tough, you want self-compassion by your side. So, it's like when you go into battle, do you want an enemy in your head cutting you down, shaming you, saying you can't do it, you're lame? Or do you want a friend like support, an ally saying, I got your back, I'm here for you? Obviously, when we go into tough situations, we're going to be stronger when we support ourselves. And again, this is backed up by the research. For instance, there's been a lot of research with combat veterans that shows that those combat veterans that come back from, overseas, Iraq or Afghanistan, who are more self-compassionate about what they experienced, they're less likely to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome, they're less likely to commit suicide or try to commit suicide, they're less likely to turn to alcohol as a way to cope with their pain. So they're actually stronger and more resilient. And that's true in a lot of different areas of life, dealing with divorce, dealing with raising a special needs kid, dealing with cancer. So when things are difficult, if you support yourself, if you're there for yourself, if you're kind to yourself, you're going to be stronger and more able to get through.
Oh, I love it. You also talk about one of the myths as self-compassion can seem to be overindulgent.
Yeah.
Like you're so focused on yourself. Can we touch on that one?
Yeah, no, sometimes people think self-compassion means like being nice to yourself, like giving yourself a break. And sometimes what you need is a break, But sometimes what you need is to get off the couch and do something, right? So when you care about yourself and you want your own well-being and you want to help alleviate your own suffering, which is really what compassion is, you know, sometimes it means working hard. So for instance, people who are more self-compassionate, they do things that maybe aren't pleasant, but it's good for their long-term health, like practicing safe sex or going to the doctor or eating right or exercising, right? So it's not, if you just give yourself pleasure, if you're just soft on yourself, you actually aren't being kind to yourself. Like an indulgent parent is not a compassionate parent. A compassionate parent, you know, doesn't scream with their kids, but also make sure that their child is healthy. And the same thing with ourselves. And then this idea that it's selfish, right? So really, if you look at self-criticism or shame, those are really self-focused emotions. When you're hanging your head in shame, you aren't really thinking about other people. You're completely absorbed inward. When you remember that, hey, everyone makes mistakes. You know, life is difficult for everyone. Then it actually allows you to be less self-focused and you've got more resources to give to other people. So again, it's the exact opposite. Self-compassion helps you have better relationships with others. People, for instance, people are more happy with when their romantic partner is self-compassionate. They judge them more positively because when you have a self-compassionate partner, they're meeting some of their own needs. They aren't like totally depending on you, which means that they actually have more resources to give to you. So self-compassion actually helps and give to others.
That's beautiful. I think there's so much of the work on self-compassion that's really about quieting that critical voice that we all have in our heads. And I wanted to ask, from your research, have you found that people are mostly aware of that voice, or do we kind of operate where that voice happens in the background and we're sometimes unaware of the impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it differs. Some people are really aware of their self-critical voice, and like they said, if you know, like the devil that sits on their shoulder, and they have this contentious fight with their self-critic. Other people, it's just like in background noise, and they don't even notice it. But the thing is, it's important. It's not like we're trying to get rid of our inner critic or even to quiet it. We're trying to say, okay, what do you have to tell me? Because often the self-critic has useful information like, hey, that's really not working out so well. You maybe you should leave that relationship or whatever it happens to be, right? So we want to listen to our inner critic, but we just want to like kind of understand, okay, this is trying to keep me safe. But then we want to try to help ourselves be safe by another voice, and that's a compassionate voice, right? So it's like we don't want to beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up. You know, again, we do it because we want to be safe, we want to be healthy. It's just not very effective. So we make space for another more kind of kind, supportive voice that also, they usually have the same goal. Our inner critic and our inner compassionate self, they both want us to be well and to be safe. But just one's more effective than the other. So we're kind of, you know, we're like making space for this other voice as opposed to quieting one, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I think sometimes when I look, especially at the self-esteem movement that we had, there's a lot of people that came out of that movement thinking, I have to be a positive thinker, I have to be an optimistic, and sometimes that has, I think, made them ignore the fact that there's that critical voice rather than paying attention to it.
Yes, exactly, right. So they either try to drown it out or they ignore it, or, you know, for instance, the research on positive affirmations, like, you know, I'm going to be able to do it, or I'm great, or I'm strong. It actually helps if you already have high self-esteem, but if you have low self-esteem, it makes it worse. Because it's like, that's not true. Part of you saying, that's not true, that's not true. So it actually makes it worse and sets up internal conflict. So self-compassion is not like self-esteem. So you know, it's good to have high self-esteem as opposed to low self-esteem if you can, right? But the sense of self-worth that comes from high self-esteem, that comes from judging yourself positively, like I'm good at this, I'm, you know, pretty, I'm smart, people love me. It's only there for us in the good times, but when we feel insecure or we get rejected or we fail at something, it deserts us. So it's unstable. It also tends to be comparative, like how smart or pretty or popular I think I am is always in comparison to you or someone else. And that sets up a really unhealthy social dynamic. You know, we're trying to like put other people down so we can feel good about ourselves. So self-compassion, a sense of worth comes with self-compassion, but it's not from like being a good person or succeeding or achieving. It's just from being a flawed human being worthy of kindness like everyone else.
Mm.
And so it's a much more stable sense of self-worth. It's a much more stable sense of self-worth. It doesn't require social comparison. You just have to be a flawed human being like everyone else. I can do that, right?
That's easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it doesn't have the downsides of self-esteem, and yet it also gives you that sense of self-worth and support.
What about, so are there habits or maybe behavior traits that we can try to recognize in ourselves if we feel like we're not as aware as we'd like to be of that critical voice, but maybe we can identify some behavior traits within ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, so the real key is how do you deal with suffering? How do you deal with pain, right? So if you're someone who has a very difficult time, maybe if you get any negative feedback, or if you have a really difficult time dealing with stressful situations, it may be a clue that maybe what's happening is you're making it worse by beating yourself up, right? So a lot of it is just kind of how